Hello and welcome back to Kerbal Fuel Crisis. We join Garicus Carmen, I can never say his name right, the clone robot. I've decided he's a clone robot because it's fun to say. And it explains why he doesn't ever have to eat, though none of them have to eat. Anyway, we're ignoring that. We join Garicus Carmen, already in orbit around Minimus. Well, not quite orbit. Last episode, we sent Cursus out to Minimus to perform scans of the surface to find kethane deposits as our advanced scout craft. He is now on his way down to land in one of the large deposits somewhat near the equator, but not as much as I would like. Unfortunately, Minimus does not appear to have any kethane deposits in the equatorial zone, which is going to make our mining operations a little harder. To cancel this out, though, Minimus actually has such low gravity that you can land anything. This plane has no trouble landing, which I expected on Minimus. It sets down so nicely, though. We'll see here in a minute. The landing gear configuration works perfectly. I'm landing it on a slope, actually partially on purpose. I was trying to find some flat land, but the slope here is necessary because the kethane deposits are not in any of the flat areas. But this slope allows us to set down on the landing gear quite nicely and then tilt forward onto the wheels so that the plane comes down in its plane position where it is designed to mine. In retrospect, it might have been nice to put one mining drill on the rear so that on slightly higher gravity planets like the moon or other bodies of similar mass that don't have atmospheres, it might have been nice to have a drill on the back of the plane so that we could have the landing gear touch down and have it stay vertical, and that would just make the takeoffs a little bit more simple. It's difficult to take off in this position, and I swear that I had an action group for the legs, but I can't find it, so we have to close them manually. But we have in fact finally landed on Minimus with the plane. This is the first time we've landed a craft on Minimus as well. Thus far, Garicus Carmen has been the first Kerbal on the moon, and then his clone robot was the first Kerbal robot on Minimus. And later on, we hope that he'll be the first on other planets. If this is the first time tuning in, this is our advanced scout craft. I'll spend a slight amount explaining it. It has SSTO capability and self-contained mining and kethane conversion technology. The idea is that we can send this craft out to a planet as our advanced ship. Since it's an SSTO, any planet that is heavy enough to have an atmosphere, it will be able to fly down and land and take off very easily. Any planet that does not, it should have no problem landing the way we just saw, as we just did here on Minimus, because we've already tested a version of this on the moon. This is Mark II. Named the KSS Curtius after Curtius I, who died returning the original craft to the planet after our trip to the moon. Now, due to some lost footage, we join already in progress our next set of base modules. Actually, it's only one module. I don't know why I pluralized it. Please forgive me. Anyway, this is the next set of modules. I did it again. This is the next module that we're putting up on our space station. It's mostly just a kethane storage unit that does have a converter built in, so it will be slightly easier to make fuel on the space station once we get this thing into orbit, which is the initial plan. I want to have a space station capable of taking on kethane, converting, hopefully finding a way to ship it down to the planet, and maybe even using the extraplanetary launch pads in order to lose my train of thought. Maybe even using the extraplanetary launch pads on it so that we can build things in orbit and not have to mess with this mucky atmosphere that we keep having trouble with. This particular rocket uses air-breathing engines for most of the ascent. It's actually gotten most of the way through the atmosphere, or through the thick atmosphere, before it has to switch over to non-air breathing mode. I'm using the Sabre engines on this because I don't have to worry about having multiple sets. When they burn out, they just switch over to using the oxidizer automatically, which is very nice. And they give you enough speed to get this thing pretty well into orbit with not much fuel. We definitely have to try to conserve our fuel, and I'm working on quite a few ideas for launch stages that use air-breathing engines, because as much as I like space planes, and as fun as they are to mess with, I spent most of this week trying to get a cargo space plane done. R&D spent days researching this thing, trying to get this particular module carried up in a cargo SSTO, and never got the thing built satisfactorily. But never mind that, we were able to get it up using very little fuel, actually. And thankfully, when we are carrying up a piece for the refueling station, if we have extra fuel, that's fine. We don't have to plan it out exactly, because anytime that we have extra fuel, that fuel simply becomes part of the extra reserve that we have in orbit, which is perfect. Unfortunately, we're not going to get a huge amount of extra fuel with this particular design. Now, as successful as this rocket was in getting into orbit, I'm noticing that it might have a problem, because this rocket is mostly hollow. As big as it looks, all of those tanks on it are empty. So we may actually wind up with some trouble if we try to use that particular design for other applications. However, we're going to keep working with the air-breathing engine design, even though it makes the launches unbearably slow. So, fine-tuning on our approach using the monopropellant we brought on board, we're going to try to dock this thing with one of the two docking ports on there. I have a rule when I'm making space stations. Anytime I have something that docks that's not a ship, any permanent part of the station that docks on has to have at least 2 more docking ports attached to it. That way you never wind up in a situation where you're running out of docking ports. This one has the main docking port we're going to use here. It has 2 side docking ports, and then it has a large docking port if we want to have massive ships or an easy way to attach large tanks to the station without having to use the smaller clampetrons here. Now, I made a huge mistake when I was building this thing, and I didn't put on enough SAS control, not SAS, RCS control units, excuse me. I didn't put up enough RCS control units, so the control of this thing was quite wonky, and that coupled with the fact that it still had quite a lot of fuel in that rear section that was throwing off the center of mass. I don't know, it was just very difficult to control. It took me a long time to line up my docking ports correctly, which is why I skipped so much of it. It was very embarrassing. And you even probably noticed I got a weird angle on it, even when I did get the intercept. This station, I have decided, is too low. I had a lot of trouble getting this core to line up with the station on its approach, so I decided to move it up to a 200 kilometer orbit, so that we'd have a little more wiggle room when we were taking things there. Now, that we are done messing around with our space station, it is time for Kerbal Kerman to leave the planet. He has filled his tanks with kethane and converted his kethane back into fuel. He has a little extra kethane on board, so if he runs out of fuel in the next bit of his trip, he should be able to convert a little bit. It wouldn't be enough to get very far, but it's enough for an emergency course correction, which you sometimes need. So, I love Minimus because you can take off pretty much like an aircraft. There's no air, so anyone who thinks that we're taking off like an airplane is mistaken. We simply have low enough gravity that coupled with the torque of the engine and the way that the SAS is pulling the ship up, we are able to simply lift the nose up off of the planet with this such low gravity as we have here. Now we're just going to take it into a nice 10-kilometer orbit, which is plenty for Minimus. It's a nice, mildly fuel-efficient orbit. I want to go around to the counterclockwise direction on the planet, because we are going to hopefully be able to use Minimus's orbit to help slingshot us around to the next target. we're already orbiting Kerbin at quite a high altitude from Minimus, so we're just going to try to make a burn directly from Minimus orbit to our next celestial body that we want to explore, which is, of course, going to be Duna. Duna being one of the easiest bodies to get to, and I'm fairly certain that our little engine here has enough delta V to make it. So, we are circularizing our orbit with this teeny little engine, which means everything goes very slow. I love using nuclear engines in this series because they are so incredibly fuel efficient. Most of the craft that I have up are using one, and they are so painfully slow. I have to speed up quite a bit of everything to get them to work out. So now, we were able to plan in a very close intercept orbit with Duna, and fire from Minimus to get our intercept going there. We are going to have to make a quick course correction on our way out. We didn't get to see much of this because it was all me messing with maneuver nodes. It was very dull. But we now have a Kerbal alarm clock set, and we're going to make that course correction in quite a few days. But Curtius is on his way outside of Kerbal Sphere of Influence. It's going to be the first Kerbin on Duna, if all goes well. Or it's going to be the first Kerbin robot to die on Duna. Ever, as far as I know. I don't know if anyone else has sent a Kerbal robot to Duna. Now it's time to send the ground crew to fuel up our next mission. I had quite a lot of trouble figuring out what to do for the next mission. We need to set up mining on the moon, but that's going to be a slightly more complicated process that we're going to go into the next episode. But some of the keen eye amongst you may have noticed that there was an unknown object in some of the map views that we had. And I took a look at it in the tracking center. It turns out that this unknown object is actually a Class E asteroid that is passing incredibly close to the planet. It's not posing a danger, but it is passing almost as close as the moon is at its perihems. So, we're going to send up this plane to hopefully dock with and capture it. Since it's going so close, we shouldn't need that much fuel to get it into a stable orbit. Now, I don't plan to get it into any kind of functional orbit. I simply want to take this up and give it that last little nudge that we need to get it into a full capture. Because once it's captured, it's just going to be another celestial body orbiting the planet. It's not going to go anywhere. And then we can take as much time as we want to send up another craft to correct the orbit and get it somewhere that we can have it usable for science or star bases or whatever we feel like using a giant asteroid for. Now, I know this may not be the most efficient use of our fuel. We don't really have much of a use for an asteroid at the moment, but it's one of those things you just want to have around. You know, you never needs half the stuff in your house, but you want to have it around just for the heck of it, and that's kind of how I feel about this asteroid. So, since this opportunity came, and in 7 days we're going to have an incredibly close encounter with this huge space rock. I always wanted to capture a Class E asteroid. Any asteroid, in fact, but I wanted to try a Class E, and one is coming straight into our backyard. I decided that we could not pass up this opportunity. So we built this quick interceptor craft that is going to fly up, intercept this asteroid, and hopefully get it into a captured orbit. We have Edos and Jack Kerman here, who are going to be the heroes of this mission. Now, this space plane has a bit of a weird thing that we have to do. The asteroid is actually passing in such a way that it is heading the opposite direction that the planet is spinning, which means we need to turn our space plane completely around and get into an orbit going the opposite direction as everything else that we have orbiting, which is going to make doing anything else with this asteroid incredibly difficult. We're actually going to have to turn around its orbit eventually. But we are able to circularize around the planet in a very wonky orbit, but close enough to our asteroid's orbit that we're going to get a easier encounter. Not the best. We still have to spend quite a lot of fuel correcting our orbit, unfortunately. We would have had way more fuel if we didn't have to correct so much if I hadn't messed up. But the way it stands, we will probably have enough. Well, we're heading off to our encounter, which is very far away. Now, this thing is going to pass as close as the moon, almost, at its periods, but it starts further away. It actually is going in a large parabola around the planet. So we're going to be encountering it several days before its periods, which will give us lots of time to get there and do our correction maneuvers and get it set up to do the final burn once it reaches the periods above the planet. Unfortunately, it also means that we have to spend quite a lot of fuel getting out there, and with these nuclear engines, that also means that we're going to have to spend a huge amount of time firing. All of these burns are, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however many minutes, which was quite boring. I left this one in long so that you could get a taste of just what I was doing for the majority of this. So now we are getting a close encounter. We're running hugely low on fuel, but as you know, if you've used nuclear engines, that gauge down there does not actually have the fine degree of detail that you need to see how much thrust your nuclear engines can actually put out. I could pull up my Delta V thingy, but I don't feel like it. But we're just getting a very close encounter. We're actually only 10 kilometers away, which we could use our RCS to get there, but I decided to just fire the engine slightly. Did not take that much Delta V. And now, the large asteroid coming out of the shadows. This is the first time I've had an encounter with an asteroid in this game. And I changed time and did all this other stuff with the mining base and yada da da da, just so we could have a save with asteroids in it, so we're now encountering an asteroid. And may I say how frustrated I am with how much news is coming out about the next Kerbal version already. I already had to do a ton of stuff to update this to the asteroid missions, but hopefully it doesn't break too much. We'll have to see if we're going to be integrating contracts into Kerbal Fuel Crisis or not. I think it could add an interesting aspect to the game, but if it's going to completely break my save and mods, then maybe not. Oh, and the keen-eyed amongst you may have noticed that the craft has changed slightly, just to keep it all on the up and up. We did have to do a quick redesign. We were losing control at a certain point in our orbit, so we did our ascent. We had to do a slight redesign on the forward wings there. It's just a quick swap out of which forward control surfaces we were using, and then I forgot to hit record, so you get to see us refueling the old plane instead of refueling the new plane. But that's what happened, and that's why it looks slightly different for any of you wondering. Now, we have gotten close, and we are able to target the center of mass, which is very important if we're going to be pushing the thing. For those of you who have not tried this, if you target not the center of mass, if you just stick your craft on anywhere that's not on the center of mass, this asteroid is much larger than the craft we're going to be pushing it with. So, if we had this thing on too far from the center of mass, every time we fired it would just send the asteroid into a spin instead of sending it out straight. Think of it like when we're building the aircrafts. We have to keep the center of thrust in line with the center of mass and center of lift. Well, not always the center of lift. Depends. I try to, because it can make things slightly more stable. But in any event, that's why we're being so careful and have to line up exactly with that center of mass indicator instead of just sticking on anywhere, which would be much more fun. I'm also purposely sticking on this side because it is closer to the direction we need to go. This is the direction that the asteroid is heading toward the planet, more or less. And that is how we're going to need to control it. We need to get this thing not exactly retrograde. We're going to need to make a maneuver at periapsis and then push it retrograde. Moving this thing should be a pain, but the length of the plane and the amount of RCS that I put on it should work in our advantage. If we have such a long plane on there with RCS on it, we should be able to just pull it around like a lever, which we were able to do. I unfortunately lost a little bit of footage of us wrangling this asteroid, but believe me, it was just a lot of footage of RCS burning on the thing. So we have now gotten to periaps, and our nuclear engines lasted a little longer than I expected. You can see the fuel is creeping down, but at this point we already have barely gotten our capture. And I'm just continuing to burn because we don't have enough fuel to get these guys home. So I would rather just try to get the asteroid into a smaller orbit than decouple them, try to get them back, and have the asteroid and the ship on two very weird orbits that I'd then have to rescue Edison Jack and get something else up to the asteroid. I'd rather have them both in the same place so that I can rescue both at the same time. But that is the end of the episode. We have captured a asteroid. We now have a third moon, which I think is kind of fun. We'll try to get it into a closer orbit later on, but unfortunately it's going the wrong direction to use in most of our things, so if we want to do anything useful with it, other than just having it for scientific data, or possibly attaching a bunch of parachutes to it and landing it at the base just for the heck of it, we're going to have to move the orbit the other direction. It's going to take a lot of fuel, so we might just try to attach parachutes and deorbit it. Opening the docking port here just on the off chance we run out of electricity, but we probably will not, but better safe than sorry, eh? Well, we have to leave poor Edison Jack here for the time being, but we might be able to rescue them next episode, or we might just ignore them for a little while. But this was exciting, wasn't it? If you've enjoyed, you can like and subscribe. I do this series every Thursday. What else I do varies, but you can take a look at other videos on my channel to see if you might enjoy some of the other things. You can follow me on Twitter for updates and announcements of when I post videos, and I also have a Tumblr where I post these and weird screenshots that you could check out as well. And nothing else, so I'm Gepwin. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you soon.